Okay, the first lesson was on the introduction, and as we went through the introduction, our first study was the view of who God is. And as we looked at who God is, the first thing that we saw is that there is a view of atheists. And the atheists deny the reality of God. And as we looked at atheists, we saw that there are three different kinds of atheists. The first one is a practical atheist, which lives as if God does not exist. The second atheist is a passionate atheist, openly reject God and is a mocker. The third and the last view of an atheist is a perilous atheist who reject God by his terminology. Not only did we see the atheist view of who God is, the next one we saw is the agnostic view. The term agnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge, or accompanied by the prefix, the letter A, which give us a negative. Therefore, agnostic means one who lacks knowledge of God. The third view that we saw was a theist. A theist believes that there are many gods. Now, it's close to pantheism and also polytheism, but in its view, it views that I have a God and you have a God, and there are many gods. Now, upon the theistic view, there is deism. Deism believes that there is no personal God whom man can relate to. He's an impersonal God, created the world, and afterwards divorced him from it. Most people see that as God creating everything in a literal 6 days and then wind up it as a clock and leave us to ourselves. Not only do we see deism, but next there is polytheism. It comes from the Greek word poly, which means many, and that means the theism means God, and therefore it comes from to mean many gods, mostly in Hindu and Buddhism. Next we see pantheism. Pantheism means that people believe that ice cream is God, the trees is God, the pillars on your house is God, and everything is God. That's the review, and that's also the recap. Now, we saw last week, excuse me, let me get the title of last week. That was the introduction. The explanation of God was the first point, but now we see the existence of God review. It does not seem to have occurred to any of the writers of either the Old and the New Testament to attempt to prove or argue the existence of God. Everywhere and at all times, it is a fact taken for granted. A God capable of proof will be no God at all. But in Exodus chapter 3 verse 14, Exodus chapter 3 verse 14 tells us that God, He is the self-existent one, the self-existent one, and the source of all life, and the source of all life. Now, in Exodus 3:14, Moses was asking God, who shall I say sent me? Now, in the New Testament, it says, ego eimi, I am that I am. And as we look at the Gospel of John, we will see that there are 7 statements of the I am. So in Exodus chapter 3 verse 14, when he says that I am, he's saying that there is no power source that allow me to be hooked up and allow me to be existing. So I am hooked up to myself, I am self-existence. But not only is he a self-existent God out of Exodus chapter 3 verse 14, it also tells us in John chapter 5 verse 26, he's the source of all life. He's the source of all life. And that's in John chapter 5 verse 26. The subliminal opening of Scripture announced the fact of God and His existence. Remember last week, Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, it says, in the beginning, what? God. So therefore, being that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, before anything was, it was God. So therefore we know that God existed in the beginning. He is self-existing. Before anything exists, he was self-existing. But not only was he self-existing, he was the source of all life, because in the beginning, then the word says God created. So if God created and God spoke the word, he is the source of life. He is the source of life. Nor is the rise or the dawn of the idea of God in the mind of man depicted. In Psalms 14:1, most atheists and most agnostics says, the fool have said in his heart that there is no God, indicate not a disbelief in the existence of God. They do not believe that God exists, but rather an active interest of God in the affairs of men. He seemed to hide himself from the affairs of men. You can see on your spare time, Job chapter 22, verse 12 through 14. Job chapter 22, verse 12 through 14. The scripture further recognizes that men not only know of the existence of God, but have also a certain circle of idea as to who and what he is. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 19. And the Bible shares with us that the wrath of God has been revealed against all mankind. Why? Because he has shown his divine Godhead. But not only that, every mankind knows subconsciously that there is a God. Well, how do we know that? How do we know that? Well, as you continue to read Romans chapter 1, they believe that there is a God, but they form a God in their own mind. They form a God in their own mind. Well, how do they do that? With creeping and crawling things, they try to make a God for themselves. Also, they try to shape them in like a man, reptiles, and so forth on. So they know that there is a God, but they have created a God out of an existing God of their own mind. No one but a fool will deny the fact of God. Remember what we said in Psalms 14:1. A fool has said in his heart that there is no God. Now, if you have your study sheets, the first thing that we would like to talk about, and talking about the existence of God, that was just an introduction of the existence of God, review. But here we're going to go over the first argument that most Christians and those who try to prove that there is a God. But there's nowhere in Scripture that indicates anywhere that we are to defend God or that we are to prove that God exists. The first argument is from cause. That's cosmological. Comes from the word meaning world. Cosmo. We know what cosmo, that's world, that's universe. This argument is based on the fact that the world exists because something cannot come from nothing. A great argument, but should we prove that God exists? There must be an original cause that is the reason for the world exists. A man has a watch, somebody may say. The fact that the watch exists suggests that there's a watchmaker who made it. The cosmological argument says that every effect must have a cause. Now that is great philosophical arguments to prove that God is who he is. Someone can say, look at this building, look at this structure. If I look at this building did not get here. Somebody had to gather the material, somebody had to be the architect, and therefore knowing the structure of the building, knowing that it's still upholding in its specific place precisely, there has to be an architect. Therefore, we look at the world, we look at our existence as a human being, and we say, well, there's got to be a God that organized all of this. It's a good argument, but do God need anyone to defend him that he exists? Not only did we see the argument from the from cosmetological. But next, the second one is the argument of design. That's teleological. Comes from the word meaning end. The teleological argument may be defined thus: order is useful. Arrangement in a system implies intelligence. Purpose in the organizing cause. The universe is characterized by order and useful arrangement. Therefore, the universe has an intelligent design. If you want to write a cross-reference down, that's Psalms 8 and 3. Psalms 8 and 3. Psalms 8, 3 through 4. Psalms 8, 3 through 4. Also, Psalms 19. Psalms 19, verse 1 through 4. What is that stating? It's stating about God's handiwork and how God has revealed in natural revelation. Now, that word revelation means He has revealed Himself. Now, there's two types of revelation in which God shows His existence. It's through natural revelation, where we see the trees, we see the birds, we see the stars. The second one is our Bible. That is special revelation. Special revelation. The alternative is that the world happened by chance. It's no more possible than a monkey being able to create a work of Shakespeare on a typewriter by playing with the keys. He just randomly typed and somehow comes up with this masterpiece of a play. There is no way. Now, that could be a great argument to say, okay, look how the sun is perfectly in its precise place. Look at the moon in its precise place and looking at the tide. But the thing is, do we need all of that to argue that God exists? We saw the teleological argument. We saw the cosmetological argument. But third, we see the argument from being. That's ontological. Man has an idea of an infinite and perfect being. From whence this idea? From finite and imperfect being like ourselves? Certainly not. Therefore, this idea argues that the existence of an infinite and perfect being, such a being must exist as a person and not as a mere thought. The argument rests that all men have an awareness of God. God must have put it there. Therefore, the argument is stating that if I'm intelligent, it had to be someone that is more intelligent than me to create me. If I have feelings, this person who made me had to give me feelings. And what he's saying is, in this ontological argument, is that everything that I have, I've been created after another image, and I'm bearing the image of this person. This person can grieve. This person can mourn. This person has feelings. This person has intellect. Someone can go and say that in Isaiah, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Your ways, His ways are not our ways. Now, those are good statements, but are they statements to present that God exists? Do God need us to stand on His behalf and say, there is a God? There is a God. Not only did we see the analogical argument, the next we see the moral argument, which is the anthropological argument. Man has an intellectual and a moral nature. So hence, the more heaviness is on a moral nature. Hence, his creator must have an intellectual and moral behavior just as well. And moral being, but notice this, he's a judge, he's a lawgiver. Man has an emotion nature, only a being of goodness and power, love, wisdom, holiness, and now we get into the communicable attributes of what God has, and therefore this argument, anthropological argument, is stating that I'm emulating this Christ. And therefore, such a nature, and these things denote the existence of a personal God. Now,